The Lost Colony remains this mystery that's at the very heart of the origin of our nation. People remain fascinated by Roanoke because we know so little about the place.
A man returns after 3 long years to find everyone gone, with just one strange word carved into a tree, CROATOAN. For over 436 years, this single word has held one of America's greatest mysteries.
More than 400 years ago, this was the site of a colony called Roanoke, the first English settlement in North America.
What happened to the Lost Colony of Roanoke? Who left that message? And why? Today, new discoveries are finally revealing the truth. What they found will truly shock you. The 1587 colony. Imagine stepping off a ship into a place where everything is new. New land, new plants, new animals, and new people who look at you with curious eyes. This was the world that greeted the English settlers when they arrived at Roanoke Island in 1587. Their leader, John White, believed this was the perfect chance to build a strong, happy English town in the New World. But life in this wild land was much harder than anyone expected. Roanoke Island sits off the coast of what is now North Carolina. It was not the first choice for English dreams. The English had already tried to build a colony here 2 years earlier in 1585. That group, led by Ralph Lane, had a rough time. They struggled to grow food, clashed with local tribes, and finally gave up and went back to England, leaving their fort behind. Still, in 1587, the English tried again, and this time the settlers were not soldiers but families. Men, women, and children all carried hope for a fresh start. They wanted farms, homes, and new lives, and John White promised that things would be better than before. At first, the settlers met friendly people from the CROATOAN tribe who lived nearby. The CROATOAN had long ties with the English and offered help, but not all relationships were peaceful. Some groups connected to the Skeptics tribe did not trust the newcomers. They remembered the anger and violence from the earlier 1585 colony, and soon tensions rose again. Even so, there were moments of joy. On August 18, 1587, a baby girl was born. Her name was Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America. Her birth felt like a sign that maybe this place could truly become home someday. But the settlers were running out of supplies. They needed food, tools, and more help from England. John White faced a difficult choice. He could either stay and watch the colony struggle or return to England and gather what they needed to survive. In the end, he chose to sail back. Before leaving, he told the settlers to carve a message if they ever had to move from the island. White planned to return quickly, but so many unforeseen troubles back home kept him away far longer than expected. While he was gone, the little colony waited, hoping help would come before time ran out. They did not know it yet, but their fragile beginning was the start of one of history's greatest mysteries. War delays rescue. After John White left the colony to bring back much-needed help, he was desperate to return to them with supplies. But England had bigger problems at that moment because Spain, the most powerful empire in the world, was coming to attack. Queen Elizabeth I heard that the Spanish Armada was heading to England, which meant the sea would soon be a battlefield. And because of that, every English ship was needed to defend the country. Even small ships that were meant for travel or trade were seized and armed for war. White's ship was one of them, so he could not leave. He could not help the settlers he had promised to protect. He had to wait and hope the people on Roanoke Island could survive without him. The year 1588 brought so much chaos. The Spanish Armada filled the sea with dark sails. England fought hard as they could, because it was a battle for their survival. But White must have stood on shore, looking out at the water, wishing he could be heading west instead of watching battles he never wanted to be part of. But unfortunately, the war dragged on, and every delay felt like a punch to the heart. Not 1 month or 1 year, but almost 3 full years passed before White found a chance to return. Finally, in August 1590, a ship took him across the ocean. White's hope grew with every mile as he must have pictured his daughter, his son-in-law, and little Virginia Dare, now a toddler with 3 birthdays behind her. He dreamed of coming back with rescue and joy. But what he found on Roanoke Island was a chilling mystery. The colony was gone. There was no one on the island to greet him, and it looked like no one had been there for a while. Since there was not even a rotting body, it seemed like everyone just upped and left. White searched every building, but found absolutely nothing. He must have felt fear climbing up his spine. Then he found a single clue carved into a wooden post. It read, "CROATOAN." That one word gave him something to be hopeful for, even though just a little bit. CROATOAN was the name of a nearby island, and White believed the settlers had moved there to join their friends, the CROATOAN tribe. He begged to sail there right away and finish the rescue, but fate was cruel again. A violent storm swept in and forced the ship to leave the area. The captain refused to risk the vessel, and White had no power to stop him. And so, the crew left Roanoke Island, and White mourned his chance of searching for his family. But with that, the mystery only deepened. Early theories and colonial reports. By the early 1600s, many years after White left, new English colonies had begun, including Jamestown in Virginia. These settlers heard stories from local tribes about people who looked different, people with lighter skin, who used English metal tools. Some tribes even had members with gray or blue eyes, which was very unusual. To many English colonists, the message seemed clear. Maybe some of the Roanoke settlers had survived and joined native communities. There were also reports of English words being spoken by people far from the coast. Imagine wandering through the woods and suddenly hearing a familiar word from a stranger. How would that make you feel? Shocked? Excited? Scared? The Jamestown colonists must have wondered if these echoes of language were signs that White's people had not vanished at all. Maybe they had simply become part of native life. Still, not all stories were hopeful. Some tales sounded somewhat frightening. As the English pushed deeper into native territory, they heard rumors that some Roanoke survivors might have been captured or forced into slavery by powerful tribes. The Powhatan Confederacy, one of the largest and strongest indigenous groups in the region, was often mentioned. The English were already nervous around the Powhatan, and hearing such rumors made them fear the worst. Historical records from that time show that the English suspected violence. They believed that the Powhatan or other tribes might have attacked the colonists. There was talk of a village where English captives were kept. There were hints of a battle in which those captives were killed. These claims were never proven, but they only made the growing mystery seem more dreadful. If Roanoke settlers had survived the first hard years, had they later met a tragic end? But wait, there was another threat in the region that the English knew all too well, and that was Spain. During this period, Spain controlled large parts of the Americas and sent soldiers and patrols along the coast. They were not friendly toward English colonies, as the two nations were bitter rivals on land and sea. Some historians believe that Spanish patrols could have discovered the Roanoke settlement and destroyed it before White returned. This idea says that the colonists did not disappear into the forest, but were wiped out by the enemies of England. So what is the truth? Were the settlers rescued by friendly tribes? Were they attacked by hostile ones? Did they fall into the hands of the Spanish? The search for the answer was only beginning. Archaeology starts digging. For a long time, the story of Roanoke lived mostly in old books, rumors, and fireside talk. People wondered, guessed, and argued, but no one could prove anything. Then the world changed, and scientists and historians began to look for real answers. Instead of listening to rumors, they wanted evidence, hard proof buried in the ground. By the 1800s, America was growing fast, and interest in the nation's earliest history grew with it. People returned to Roanoke Island to search for clues. They dug around the old fort site, hoping for something that would shout the truth. But much of what they found was from later settlers or unrelated uses of the land. the mystery stayed locked away. Things became far more exciting in the 1930s. A man claimed to have found a large stone in the woods inland from Roanoke. On the rock, there were carvings that told a chilling story. It said that many of the settlers had been killed by native groups and that only 7 survived. The message even named Virginia Dare's parents. This rock became known as the first Dare Stone. Everyone was thrilled. Could this be it? Could this stone finally reveal the fate of the lost colony? More stones soon appeared, each with more writing. They described long travels, suffering, and final deaths. Newspapers jumped on the story and museums wanted the stones. The stones traveled on display tours that drew huge crowds, and people thought the mystery was finally solved. But as excitement grew, so did doubts. Experts studied the writing style and the language carved into the stones, and something felt off. The English used on the stones did not match how people wrote in the 1500s. Even the spelling looked too modern. Investigators dug deeper and soon uncovered the truth that crushed hopes. Most of the Dare stones were forgeries, fake clues made by people who wanted fame or money. The disappointment was heavy, and again, the Roanoke mystery became void of tangible answers. The Great Drought. As archaeologists searched the ground for answers, another group of scientists looked upward, toward the trees. Trees, after all, are timekeepers. Every year, they grow a new ring deep inside their trunks. Good years leave thick rings. Hard years leave thin ones. And in the 1990s, scientists began checking old trees from the region where Roanoke once stood, hoping to understand the world those lost settlers lived in. What they found changed the story. In 1998, a major scientific study was published using tree rings from Virginia and the Carolinas. The rings revealed a terrifying truth. The years 1587 to 1589 were not just tough years. They were the worst drought in 800 years in that entire region. There was no rain, dry rivers, dying plants, and farms turning to dust. The Roanoke settlers arrived at the exact beginning of this disaster. Suddenly, many pieces of the puzzle made sense. Growing food would have been almost impossible. Hunting would have been harder because animals would have moved away in search of water. Even the local tribes, who knew the land far better than the English, would have struggled to survive. And when food becomes scarce, friendships are tested. Remember those shaky alliances between the settlers and local tribes like the CROATOAN and CROATOAN? Those relationships may have collapsed when hunger set in. Why share food with strangers when your own people are starving? Trust can vanish fast when every meal feels like a fight for survival. The drought gives us a new way to understand the colony's choices. They did not simply wait for John White to return because they could not. They had to act, and fast. Some historians suggest that the settlers may have split into smaller groups. A big group is loud and difficult to feed. A small group can move quietly, hunt more easily, and stay hidden. The tree ring research makes this idea far more believable. The settlers may have scattered in different directions, searching for any tribe willing to help or any land where crops might grow. This explains why the colony looked empty but not destroyed when White returned in 1590. No signs of war or burned buildings, just the remains of the place that people left behind without time to pack properly. They might not have been planning a forever goodbye, since they were only trying to survive that season. So sure, the Great Drought may not give us every answer, but it explains why the settlers had to leave, and the search for where they went next was about to get even more exciting. The Map That Changed Everything, 2012 discovery. For years, the hunt for answers took place in the dirt, in forests, and on beaches. But in 2012, a new clue appeared in the most surprising place of all. On a piece of paper that had been sitting safely in a museum for centuries, White's original map of the Roanoke region had always been important to historians. It showed the coastline, rivers, Roanoke Island, and areas the settlers hoped to explore. The map had been studied many times before, yet somehow, one major secret stayed hidden in plain sight. Researchers at the British Museum decided to take a fresh look at the map. They placed it under bright lights and used modern scanning tools to peek beneath the surface, where they noticed something strange. There was a small patch of paper that had been glued over part of the map long ago. Curious, they looked beneath it, and what they found made headlines around the world. Under the patch was a tiny drawing of a fort, not on Roanoke Island, but far inland, around 50 miles west of the colony's original location. This was not random, but matched exactly what John White wrote in his notes back in 1587. The settlers had planned to move inland for safety and better resources. Suddenly, theories had something solid to stand on. Maybe the colonists did not vanish into thin air. Maybe they did not scatter into small groups. Maybe they had a destination, a goal, a protected place to rebuild, and John White knew about it. This discovery changed everything. Historians quickly shared the findings with archaeologists in the United States. The First Colony Foundation, a group dedicated to solving the Roanoke mystery, launched a new investigation based on the map. They named the inland location Site X. It was near what is now the town of Edenton, North Carolina. If the lost settlers really moved there, the ground at Site X might hold answers no one had ever found before. So digging began with excitement and caution. Archaeologists carefully removed small amounts of soil, searching for anything that could connect the site to the 1587 colony. And soon, finds began to appear. They found European ceramics, parts of metal objects, and even tools not made by local tribes. This was a pretty big discovery. These artifacts showed that Europeans were present in the area long ago, and the time period looked close to the right era. But the challenge was that while the items strongly suggest English presence, none of them can be tied directly and without doubt to the Roanoke settlers. There are no names carved into the objects, no personal item clearly belonging to someone we know from the colony. But then, something even more important surfaced, or rather, did not surface. There were no clay tobacco pipes. At first, this might not sound exciting, but archaeologists know that clay pipes flooded English colonies after 1600, when tobacco smoking exploded in popularity. If Site X had been settled later, there would almost surely be pipes everywhere. But there were none. The whole thing suggests the English presence at Site X happened before pipe culture became common, which matches the exact timeline of the 1587 Roanoke colonists. So what does this mean? It means that survivors from Roanoke very likely made it inland. They lived long enough to move, rebuild, and leave behind broken objects for us to uncover centuries later. They were not wiped out immediately, but adapted, at least for a while. But the big question is still, was Site X the new home of the entire colony, or just a part of it? Some experts think the settlers split up. One group may have followed the CROATOAN plan and headed toward Hatteras Island. A second group may have traveled west to Site X, searching for better land or safer allies. Smaller groups could hide more easily and survive tough times like the Great Drought. Others argue the whole colony regrouped at Site X first, then later scattered. With no written records and only fragments left behind, the truth stayed frustratingly out of reach. Site Y and the Metaquem village. While Site X gave researchers their first strong taste of hope, the search did not stop there. If the Roanoke colonists split into smaller groups, as many experts now believe, then more traces should exist somewhere nearby. So archaeologists kept digging and exploring the region west of Roanoke Island. And soon, attention shifted to another location that might hold more pieces of this puzzle. They called it Site Y. Site Y sits close to the area where a native settlement known as Metaquem once stood. When archaeologists began working there, they found a curious mix of objects buried together. Native pottery and tools were expected, but along with them were items clearly made by Europeans. This combination immediately raised eyebrows. Why were they together? Who brought these things here? The answer that made the most sense was that survivors from Roanoke moved into native communities. Think about what life would have been like during the Great Drought. Crops failing, rivers drying up, and tribes struggling to feed their own families. A large foreign group showing up with almost nothing to offer could be seen as a threat, but a small group, a handful of settlers with useful skills and metal tools, that might be different. At Site Y, the artifacts tell a story of cooperation. The English objects were not found inside a separate European-style spot. They were mixed in with native home sites and daily life. This suggests that any English people living there were not separate outsiders. They were part of the community. This supports a growing idea among Roanoke researchers, a split settlement survival strategy. Instead of sticking together and risking everyone's death, the colony may have divided into smaller units. One group moved to Site X. Another traveled to Site Y and joined the people of Metachem. Splitting up gave them the best chance to avoid starving. It also made them less threatening to tribes already under pressure from the drought. Small groups can adapt faster, blend in, and they leave behind fewer footprints, which makes their story much harder to uncover later. The Site Y finds are different from Site X in an important way. At Site X, the artifacts mostly showed English style and use. At Site Y, everything feels shared and melted together. This paints a picture of English survivors slowly transforming into members of native society. Over time, their clothing, tools, and language may have changed until nothing marked them as outsiders anymore. If this happened, then the lost colonists were not really lost at all. They lived on through their children and grandchildren. Their history simply flowed into another culture's story. The Hatteras Island, CROATOAN. Evidence. As the search moved forward, one place kept coming up again and again: Hatteras Island. This is the same area once known as CROATOAN. The word CROATOAN, as we know, was found carved on the post when John White came back in 1590. Many researchers think this clue means that some or all of the settlers went to live with the CROATOAN people who lived there. To learn more, a local historian named Scott Dawson teamed up with archaeologist Mark Horton. Together, they began digging on the island. They worked with care, brushing away sand and dirt little by little. Over time, they began finding objects that were very interesting. These items did not belong to the native community alone. They looked like things English people would have used in the 1500s. Some of the most surprising objects were parts of weapons, such as pieces of gun barrels and a metal hilt from a sword or knife. These items were made in England, and experts dated them to the late 1500s. This matches the exact time the Roanoke settlers lived. The team also uncovered a piece of a slate writing tablet. English settlers used these for schoolwork or messages because they could write on them with a sharp tool and wipe the marks away later. This is something native peoples would not have used before contact with Europeans. Finding these objects in a native village suggests that these settlers did not just pass through. They likely lived with the CROATOAN people and shared objects, skills, and daily life. This points to a real relationship between the two groups. Instead of war or harm, the evidence shows signs of cooperation and community. These discoveries match the stories that have been passed down by the descendants of the CROATOAN and later Lumbee peoples. For many years, families have told tales of English ancestors who came to their villages long ago. They spoke of friendships, shared food, and even marriages between the settlers and members of the tribe. These stories always kept alive the idea that the lost colony did not disappear at all, but simply blended into the community around them. Scientists say that objects are better evidence than stories alone. But when objects and stories point in the same direction, that path becomes hard to ignore. The finds at Hatteras Island give weight to the belief that many of the Roanoke settlers found safety there. They built new lives, raised children, and became part of the tribe that helped them survive. So while we still cannot name every person or trace every life, the Hatteras Island discoveries show a strong possibility. The missing colonists did not vanish into thin air. They stayed alive by joining a new family and a new way of life, and their memory may live on in the people who still call that island home today. Skeptics versus believers. Even with all the clues found over the years, experts still do not fully agree on what happened to the Roanoke colonists. The mystery continues because each new discovery can be read in more than one way. Some archaeologists say the objects found at places like Site X and Site Y might not belong to the lost colony at all. They believe these items could have come from later English settlers who moved through the area after Jamestown was built. To them, the evidence is interesting, but not strong enough to say, yes, the Roanoke settlers were definitely here. Others strongly disagree. They say the age of the pottery and the way the objects are spread out across different locations fits perfectly with the timeline of the lost colony. They argue that nothing else explains the evidence better. If Jamestown settlers were the source, then clay tobacco pipes should be found. But many of these sites have artifacts from years before tobacco became common. For these researchers, everything points to Roanoke survivors. The biggest questions remain unanswered. How many people actually survived after John White left? Some think only a small group lived long enough to move inland or south. Others believe most of the colony survived for years. Did the colonists split up or stay together? Some evidence shows signs of life near the coast, such as on Hatteras Island. Other evidence suggests movement to inland villages. This creates a picture of a split survival, where groups separated to improve their chances of finding food and safety. But what became of them once they joined native tribes? Many experts believe they were fully absorbed into indigenous families. Over generations, their English identity may have faded away. The settlers would have learned new languages and traditions. Their children and grandchildren would have been seen simply as members of the tribe. The most recent breakthroughs. In recent years, the search for the lost colony has taken some exciting steps forward. The story is moving from old guesses toward clearer clues. Here's what has happened so far. At the site known as Site X in Bertie County, North Carolina, the digging has continued. Archaeologists found more pieces of pottery made in England during the late 1500s. These items match the kind used by the English during the time of the colony. The fact that these ceramics come from that era makes the case stronger that English people may have been living there after the colony vanished. Besides digging, modern tools are helping. Ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing methods are being used to look under the ground without removing all the dirt. These scans show shapes and patterns that look like they may be old buildings or settlement structures. This means that people may have lived in a place for some time, rather than just passing through. Another key area is genetics and anthropology. Some studies show that indigenous communities in eastern North Carolina carry traces of European ancestry that appear earlier than many other colonial settlements. While the studies do not yet tie these genetic traces directly to the 1587 colony, they support the idea that English settlers may have lived among native peoples and intermarried, passing on their genes and culture. Still, it's important to be clear. None of this is a final answer. The pottery and structures could possibly belong to later settlers. The genetic evidence is intriguing, but it does not yet show a clear line back to a named person from the 1587 colony. Many experts caution that more work needs to be done before we can say, this is the colony. Putting all the pieces together, though, gives us a somewhat clear picture. English period ceramics inland, signs of settlements in non-coastal places, and early European ancestry among native peoples all point in the same direction. That direction says the colony may not have simply failed and vanished. It may have moved, adapted, and lived on. Do you think they built a new life that has been hidden in plain sight for centuries? And what proof do you believe will show up next? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.